Man, do I have a story for you. So, it all started when I decided that I was going to do an Ancestry DNA test. I had made a tree and just wanted to learn about relatives. When I was really little, my family, we moved away from all of my extended family. So I just wanted to learn about them, and so I started making the tree, and then I thought, man, if I did this DNA test, that would give me the most information. I could kind of confirm my tree, and I could see where we're really from, because the information I got from my parents was kind of vague. They would say, my dad said, well, our surname is Dutch, and so there's a lot of Dutch on his side, German, Irish, turns out on his side. So that's what I expected on his side. And then for my mom's, they were all Slavic. So Hungarian, from Austria, Polish, and all of that. And that's what she would tell me. She would just list off all of these like Slavic countries, and she didn't know specifically what, but that's what she would say. So that's what I expected. And so I did the test, and I was like, this is just gonna be cool or whatever, but I did not think what happened would happen at all, like not in a million years. Like I said, Polish, Hungarian, Slovakian, Irish, German, Dutch, like those are all the things that I expected. So I was gonna do like a reaction video of me seeing my results for the first time, but when I saw them, I was like really shocked. So first of all, it said, the 50% of me was those Slavic things, which, okay, expected, yes. So Polish, Hungarian, Slovakian, all those, okay, cool, that makes sense. And then Scottish, like 14%. Where did that come from? Like, okay, I guess that, because then there was 14% Irish, and I was like, okay, so, was it 14%? I don't know exactly, but maybe I'll try to put that in here. But I was like, okay, so maybe the Scottish and Irish are mixed together. Like, okay, that's fine. There was also like Estonia and Lithuania, and that made sense. And then like Baltic, I think is what it's called. And so I was like, okay, yeah, those people, that makes sense. And then I saw that there was some European Jewish, which cool. I was kind of expecting that. I was actually hoping for more, because I think it's really cool. But I think it was only 1%, which means like 7 generations back. And I know some family stories, so I know that there were Jewish people now, but obviously it's not a high percentage in the recent history. But then I started like thinking, I'm like, man, why is there no Dutch? Like, my surname is Dutch, and there's like this big rich history with it, and like my dad knows a lot about it, and like, I don't know. And in the Netherlands, my surname is pretty popular. It's like Smith there. To Smith here, our last name is to there. And so I'm like, this is really weird. Why would that not come up? And one part that I didn't say was like Iceland and Norway came up on there too. And I'm like, well, maybe they were like Norwegian and they just moved to the, I don't know. And I'm like trying to rationalize it in my brain. I'm like, this is really weird though, because it was such a strong history, and I traced it all the way back to like 1500s, and it'd just be really strange, And I know that DNA doesn't understand borders, and I know that people move, and that just because someone was born somewhere doesn't mean that all of their ancestors were born there too, obviously, so I'm like, that's cool. So I just think, oh, well, that's fun. Like, my dad is going to be so shocked. Like, I don't know, I can't wait to tell him. But then, I go into my DNA matches, and the first one is like my half-sister, and I expected that, and I'm like, cool, there she is. And then I see some cousins from my mom's side, and I was like, okay, that's cool that they're there. And I looked at how much we share and what countries, and it all made sense. And then there was this name that I'd never heard of before. And I was like, who is this? And it said the amount shared was first cousin. And if you don't know this, so the amount of shared DNA is measured in centimorgans, and Ancestry will give you kind of a cousin related idea of how you're related. Does that make sense? So we shared enough DNA that it could have been a first cousin, but doesn't mean that he was a first cousin. It just means that that's what their top guess is always cousins. But so I'm looking at them and like, I know all of my first cousins. Like, I don't know all of them like really well, but I know all of their names. And this surname is, I've never heard of in my life. So I'm like, this is so weird. And then I scroll down and I'm just like, who could this be? So I thought about it a little more, and then I'm like, could this be a family member that no one knows about? So there's some sites where you can put in a centimorgan amount and it'll give you some other ideas of what your relationship could be. So I did that and I put in the number. I think it was like 800 or 900 something, and 800 something. Yeah. And it said first cousin, great nephew, great grandparent. No, can't be that. And then it said great uncle, and I'm like, maybe. But then it said half uncle, half aunt. And I was like, oh, whoa, wait a minute. What if this is like a sibling of my father? Oh, also, I looked at the shared DNA, and it seemed like it wasn't my mom's side stuff. It was whatever's on my dad's side. So it had like that Scottish and Irish and that kind of stuff. And I was like, okay, so this has to be a father's side match. Anyway, so I call my dad, I tell him my results, and then I tell him about this. I'm like, I think this might be like a sibling of yours. And it wasn't crazy to think that maybe his dad cheated. He was an interesting character. So, you know, he had a little bit of a drinking problem, and he would go out late nights, and, you know, maybe, I don't know, it just kind of fit, you know, anyway. So he was kind of shocked, but he's like, you know, why don't you message them? So I did. I messaged them and said, hey, you know, we have this match. I put you as my cousin, but, you know, I'm wondering, I don't know how I worded it, but basically he came back and was like, I was like, I think you might be like a match. You're on my father's side. Like, you're coming up as a cousin, but I think you might be like a half uncle. And so he responded and said, who is your father? Is it a, and then he gave his surname, like, is your father's last name, blah, blah, blah. And so I responded, like, no, this is my father's name, and, you know, this may sound crazy, but, do you know who your, like, I asked him, do you know for sure who your father is? Like, was there any speculation, blah, blah. So we're going back and forth, and he said he wouldn't be surprised if who he thought was his father was not his biological father. So I was like, oh man, this could really be it. So we just started exchanging information. I kind of looped in all of my aunts and uncles. So my dad has, he has an older sister, and then he has an older brother, and then it's him, and then he has a little brother. So there's 4 of them. And we kind of looped them in, and they're like, this is crazy, like, what, we could have another brother, oh my goodness. So they start talking themselves. So now my dad's talking to this guy. We found his business page, he sent me his email, and whatever, they started talking, and they decide that maybe they should think about doing an in-person DNA test. Like, this is fascinating. We find out that, I'm sorry if this is all over the place, it's a lot of information. I forgot to say that first, we thought that this could have been a family member that no one knew about, and that it was one of my dad's brothers or my dad's sister's child. That was my first thought. I forgot to say that because I don't know, there's just so much going on, and it went by so fast and whatever. But there was a point at which my first thought was, this is a cousin, and it is one of their children that we don't know about, or they don't know about. one of his brothers was in the military, and I was thinking, oh, maybe he had a child with someone and like they didn't tell him. And so that was my first thought. And then later on, the idea of him being a brother came up because he told me that he's 57 years old. And so the fact that he was 57 years old ruled out the other ideas of the matches that it could be, the other possible relationships, because he couldn't be one of their children because they're not old enough for that to be their, he's too old for them to be their child. He couldn't be a nephew because he's too old for that. He couldn't be a great uncle because he's too young to be one. And my great grandfather died young. So anyway, we ruled it out. It was a process of elimination because of his age. That's not what he is. But we find out that his mom lived in the same area as my dad's parents, and maybe they went to high school together, and so it's not crazy to think that this is possible. And so I don't know if it was the next day, I woke up and there was this big long email from this guy. I had sent so many emails with him the day before, and with my dad, and I'm on the phone for hours and hours with my aunts and uncles, and like it was a lot. Like everyone was overwhelmed. I was shocked. It was a lot to take in. Like they could have this brother that they didn't know. So I'm trying to make sense of the match, and I was looking through my DNA matches the night before, and I noticed that there was another person with his surname, with his last name. And I was like, huh, that's weird. Like this matches him, and they were both, there was two of them, and they matched as second cousins. And I was like, huh, why would they have his last name? So I emailed him that night and was like, do you know these people? Like, are they your children? Because that would make sense if they were his children, and then I'm matching to them, you know, as cousins. And if he's a half uncle, then they would be half cousins, so maybe you would think that they're second cousins. Anyway, so he's like, oh, I don't know who that is, I'll figure it out. But the next morning I get this really long email, and he's asking if I have certain people on my matches, and if my half-sister does too, and because he has this new theory. And it made my world shake. So he says, look, that's my sister's kids that you're matching with. And I am matching with everyone on my father's side and on my mother's side that I know has taken the test. So I don't think it's me. I think that my father is the one that has the different parentage. And it like clicked, and I was like, whoa, like it really made so much, it makes sense. So there was the facts, that had to be the truth. And my dad called, like he knew that I was reading this email, and he told me that he had gotten a similar email, and that he believed that might be the truth, and that looking at this evidence, it didn't seem probable any other way, because I wouldn't be matching to people on his father's side unless that's my grandfather. Wow. So this kind of shook up it turned everyone's world upside down. So now it wasn't that my grandfather, who was kind of like a party animal, did his own thing kind of guy, cheated. It was, I mean, he might have, who knows, but it was that my grandmother did. And the evidence was leaning towards this was very, very, very likely. So, you know, and it's just weird to think that she would do that. And so then we thought about it more, and I guess his father worked on the street that that the diner was on that she worked at, and it turns out that they went to high school together. So everyone was kind of thinking, wow, like how many of them, like my dad and his siblings, are this guy's instead of the father that they've always known. Like all of them could be. It could have been a 10-year affair. It could have been a one-night stand, and it's just my dad. We didn't know. And so, as you can imagine, emotions were high, and my dad took it really well. He's just like, well, it is what it is type of, thing. He just doesn't let it get to him. My aunt was more upset. And so when we discussed other of my aunts and uncles taking a test, and we went back and forth on that, my aunt decided that since my dad and this probable half-brother are doing an in-person DNA test together, that she would do Ancestry and see how she comes up. And so that's going to take 6 weeks. My other 2 uncles are not interested. So, yeah, so that's how that went. And they're just, I think they're in shock. There's a shock aspect to it. And it affects a lot more people than you would think about at first. Because here I am, I have a different grandfather and a different line on my tree. Like that whole branch, his father's side is wrong. I'm not related to anyone over there. My children have a different great-grandfather. My cousins are half cousins now. My aunts and uncles are half aunts and uncles, which I don't view them any different, but you know what I mean. It's just now I'm most likely have this family that I don't know anything about. I don't know anything about them. I don't know their health history. I don't know who they are as people. I have cousins. I don't even know their names. It's like my brain, right? So anyway, so if it's just my dad, he would have 8 half siblings. That would mean that none of his siblings are full, and he would have 8 total from both sides, half siblings. Think about that. That is crazy. And he is 61 years old, by the way. Imagine finding out that your father is not your father at 61 years old. And we don't know if my grandma knew and if she kept it a secret. And I think that's the part that he's struggling with is, his father passed away in 88. And my brother's actually named after him. But anyway, that's another story. But he passed away in 88, and so she had lots of time that she could have, spilled the beans about this if she knew. I mean, there's a chance she didn't know. There's a chance that she just assumed that it was her husband's, and she went with it. And maybe there was a denial aspect where she just wanted it to be his. So, yeah, and as of now, I don't know if I haven't mentioned this part, but this half-uncle that we've been in contact with, that my dad is doing the DNA test with, his father actually passed away 2 months ago. 2 months. So, my dad could have been 2 months shy of meeting his biological father, which is crazy. And everyone else, his mother, my grandma, and my grandpa are all deceased at this point. Which maybe is for the best in this situation that they're already passed, because I think it would make it much more complicated and awkward and dramatic to kind of have to confront one of these people directly about what happened and why. And yeah, so then since then we've just, it's gonna take a week for my dad's results to come in with this probable half uncle. And everything's just trying to set in, and I was thinking about it, and since I have the Ancestry DNA results, I downloaded my raw DNA file, as you can, and I got this idea. I was like, my cousin, who is one of my uncle's daughters, that's in this situation, and he doesn't want to test, but she has taken a 23andMe test. And so I was like, if she uploads her raw DNA and I upload my raw DNA to GEDmatch, we could see how related we are without him doing the test. Which, I don't know, is that wrong? I don't know. So, but she really wanted to. She wanted to know if we were full cousins or half. So we're like, you know what, whatever. She can do whatever she wants with her DNA. So she did. And I did, and we compared, and the next day we got the results, and it came up only the amount of DNA shared could be half cousins. So now we know that her father has, I mean, probably has, because you never know if she cheated anymore, or I don't know. Maybe they were swingers. I mean, we really don't know. There's like so many like situations that could be, but we'll never know. I mean, anyway, so she's my half cousin. And so that kind of proves that he's my dad's half brother. So his father's actually who he thought, probably. But it's just interesting because these types of secrets used to go with people to their grave, right? And maybe it happened a lot more than we think. And people were in unhappy marriages and they had issues and they didn't feel like they could leave. They didn't feel like they could have a divorce back then. And so they, not that saying it's right, but a lot of people cheated and maybe had children from someone else, and they never had to share it or never felt like they had to, because how was that going to be found out? You know, they didn't have the DNA, at-home DNA tests that we have now. So, yeah, it's just been kind of a whirlwind, and we're going to see. I mean, time will tell, but scientifically, if you look at the amount of DNA that I share with this man and his nieces and nephews, and it just doesn't seem like anything else is likely other than that my dad has a different father. I have a different grandfather. And you know, Ancestry tried to connect the through lines, and there was through line connections for every single of my grandparents' lines other than that side. There was no surnames, no last names on any of my DNA matches that were on that line whatsoever. There was no way for me to connect it and to disprove it. So yeah, that's it. That's where we're at. So now we just anxiously await to have that test. And I mean, I'm pretty much convinced, and so is my father, but I think having that in-person, isolated DNA test, say it again, will be really helpful to this man and his family. I guess my half-uncle and his family, because he hasn't said anything to them yet, and I think that he needs that to kind of be the further proof. I mean, I can't imagine how they will react. They'll probably be in as much shock and have their mind spinning and like, wow, like our father cheated, and is this the only one? Is like, wow, it's just a lot. So yeah, that's basically how a simple at-home DNA test flipped my family's world upside down. And this is a PSA that it is something that you need to consider if you're going to do one of these tests. So just because you think everything is just a boring, normal situation, and that everyone, no one has secrets in your family, you could really turn some people's worlds upside down. And you could find out things that you never expected, and you need to be prepared for that. But yeah, that's it. Until next time.